Chapter 5, Mishnah 3. A basic rule of tithing is that one could designate truma or meiser in one batch of produce for another batch. For example, designate truma and meiser in one pile of grain to fix the tevel in another pile of grain, as long as both batches are equally subject to the obligation. However, one cannot designate something that is not subject to the obligation of truma or meiser for something that is subject to the obligation, or something that is subject to the obligation as trumas or meiser for something that is not. If he does so, the truma or meiser designation does not take effect, and the tevel he intended to fix remains forbidden as tevel. The same rule applies when tithing Demai produce. The next several Mishnahs discuss the law regarding Demai bread, or other foods, that may have been supplied by a number of different Amei arts. Since the breads come from different people, some of whom may have separated maestros, and some who did not, we do not know for sure whether they are all untithed, tevel, or tithed, chulin, or some of each. If the person were to tithe all the bread together, he might be tithing from produce that is biblically obligated, tevel, on behalf of produce that is biblically exempt, chulin, or the other way around. Our Mishnah cites 3 views about how to tithe Demai bread based on thought from a baker. We now turn to the words of the Mishnah. If someone buys loaves of Demai bread from a baker, he may separate tithes from hot loaves, i.e. fresh bread from today, which is still warm from the oven, for cold loaves, yesterday's bread, or from cold loaves for hot ones, i.e. yesterday's bread for today's bread. We are not concerned that yesterday's loaves were made from grain that came from one supplier, while today's loaves were made from grain from a different supplier. And he may tithe one day's bread for another, even if the loaves were baked in many different molds and are of different shapes, because we do not assume that the use of different molds indicates that they were made from grain that came from different suppliers. These are the words of Rebbe Meir. The next Tana disagrees with the first part of Rebbe Meir's ruling. Rebbe Yehuda prohibits tithing one day's bread for another, because I suspect that the wheat used to make yesterday's bread was from one supplier, and the wheat used to make today's bread was from another supplier. Therefore, if he tithes one day's bread for the other, he might be tithing obligated produce on behalf of exempt produce, or the opposite. Both Rebbe Meir and Rebbe Yehuda agree that differently shaped breads make no difference to the law of Demai, and one may be used for meiser for the other. Their dispute concerns only breads baked on different days. The Mishnah now cites a third opinion, which holds that the use of different molds does affect the law. Rabbi Shimon prohibits tithing loaves made in one type of mold for loaves made in another type of mold with respect to Trumas Maisa, because the use of different molds indicates that the wheat came from different suppliers. But he permits doing so with respect to the challah obligation, i.e., he permits separating challah from one loaf for another, even if they were baked on different days and in different molds.